fighting the battle that we're talking about today, it's okay. It'll help you as well. But for some of you, this is something you really need to hear. Today's guest is the Reverend Percy McCray, and let me tell you, he's the host. Well, he's the host of a podcast called Health, Hope, and Inspiration. But he's also the director of faith-based programs at the Cancer Treatment Centers of America. And he doesn't know this. He's hearing this for the first time as he's waiting for me to go to him. But the Cancer Treatment Centers of America is where my sister sought care. She struggled with cancer for 7 years, passed away at the way too young age of 40. And so there's one in Tulsa, Oklahoma, where I used to live, where she lived. And I know that facility alone has helped so many people. And you're going to, I think, find out why, because their approach is not limited to the physical. It's much more than that. And so I was excited when I had the opportunity to talk to today's guest. So we're going to get into this. Chat is open. If you know someone that is fighting cancer, you might want to go ahead and hit share now. Tag them in it so they can listen. I think it will be a real good time especially for people that are fighting cancer or any disease. You know, we're going to offer hope to all of you that is whatever situation you're in. It'll be good for you. So, welcome, and Reverend McCray, thank you for being here with me today.
Well, thank you, Randy. It's a pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and your guests or your listening audience. And so it's a privilege to be a guest on the show today.
I think the first thing that naturally comes to mind when someone's in the position that you're in is because that's not easy. I mean, most people don't know what to say to someone who's fighting cancer. I've been there. It's a hard position to be in, but you talk to people on a regular basis. Why in the world would you get into this? And I'm glad you did, by the way.
It's an interesting question. I've been asked a million times over the years. Just this month, I am celebrating my 25th year in hospital ministry, specifically to cancer patients. And ironically, in the very beginning, way back when I was just a young lad, fresh out of Bible college there in Tulsa, Oklahoma, as you've referenced, I was introduced to an organization that I had not heard of called Cancer Treatment Centers of America by an individual who worked there, and asked if I would be interested. They knew obviously of my background, that I was going to school, had graduated in pastoral care studies with my desire to basically start my own church and enter into the pastorate. And so I was actually asked if I would be interested in providing ministry to the bedside of cancer patients inside of a healthcare organization. And you're exactly right. 25 years ago, there was very little known or understood about hospital ministry, chaplaincy, and et cetera, and certainly was not a sought out vocation from a ministerial perspective. And, through a series of events, I decided to have a conversation with the organization. And lo and behold, they gave me an opportunity to join the rank and file there and basically to help facilitate a more robust internal presence of spiritual support and care for patients, as you stated, along with good clinical and medical care. And so I started down that path, knew very little about that environment, but as it was serendipitously kind of worked out, the Lord really opened up a door and really led me down a path that now has become my life's work. So over the last 25 years, I have ministered to, prayed with, provided spiritual support and guidance to thousands, literally, of cancer patients and their caregivers, and almost missed the will of God for my life because I have my mind fixed around only being a pastor inside of the four walls of the local church. And the Lord had other designs for me. And so here I am 25 years later.
Well, thanks for listening. What are you a Rhema grad?
I am a Rhema
All
grad. I
right,
am.
nice, nice. Nailed it. All right. This this can't obviously it can't always be easy. If it's a heavy job, just tell us some of the things that you have learned over the years, that maybe when you started, you faced some things that you didn't know how to handle, but as you walked through them over these years, you've been able to help people in situations. What are some of the big issues that you deal with?
Yeah, it's a legitimate question, and cancer is a big subject and a big conversation, and it has big implications mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and certainly physically to people. And so, initially, some of the things that I learned right out the gate is number one, no one's cancer journey is similar. They're all different, just like you and I. We're uniquely different. And therefore, that is certainly true from a clinical, mental, emotional, and spiritual perspective of dealing with the cancer journey. Very different, very unique. And part of that insight is that you must learn the skill set of being a very good listener versus a very good speaker. Obviously, a lot of impetus is placed upon and emphasis is placed upon in the quote unquote what we call fivefold ministry gifts, being a pastor, a teacher, prophet, apostle, etc. Is how much of a speaking ability do you have, and how well can you communicate and translate and articulate, concepts and precepts to people. But in the space of cancer care ministry, it's actually very much reversed, that you need to become a very good listener and allow the patient and or their caregiver to provide you with the nuts and bolts of who they are, and what their needs are. And they're very unique and different. And so I learned right away not to come in with a pre-inscribed message and a set of scriptures that I'm ready to rattle off at any moment, and become a sponge and allow the environment to dictate to me what should be done and how to respond to people accordingly, and really allow them to drive the bus. Cancer patients often struggle with not feeling like they're being heard. Everyone is telling them what to do. The doctor is telling them what to do. The nutritionist is telling them what to do. Somebody is always telling them, do this, do that, do the other. And so then you come in from a spiritual care perspective, and we tend to bring that same disposition to the table. And that's exactly what cancer patients do not need, nor do they want. They want to be heard, and they want space to articulate and unpack what's going on in their heart. So the biggest challenge really was learning how to be a better listener versus a dynamic speaker. And then the Lord said to me, there's a reason why I gave you 2 ears and 1 mouth. I'll let you do the math and figure out what the there. So those are some big things that
Yeah,
really was important to understand.
yeah. Lord said that to you. My mom said that to me. So, is there anything that is, you know, typical? I know every journey is different, but surely you get some of the same expressions, maybe the same questions, some of the same frustrations. What are some of the more common things that you hear from people that you're able to help them with?
You're right. There kind of is some commonality of what we call big questions. Cancer facilitates people having to ask big questions and need big answers. And probably the number one big question that cancer facilitates in the consciousness of an individual is, why me? Why now? I've lived a good life. And from a faith-based perspective, I've served the Lord. I've been faithful in my church. I've had the privilege of supporting pastors who have had to come to terms with, I've been faithful over the work of the flock and the congregation. And why me? Why is this happening to me? And I think it's a very human dynamic, because cancer is jarring. As one cancer patient articulated to me many, many years ago, that when the word cancer is directed at you, it is the only word that you hear in big, bold letters inside of your head, and everything else literally freezes and stops in its tracks. And I can relate to that, as now going close to now 2 years now being a cancer patient. that when you hit that word associated with you, it just stops you in your tracks and you're kind of in a state of suspended animation. And when you kind of come out of that into a moment of clarity and sobriety, then you begin to start thinking about why me, what what has my life meant. I often say that cancer patients engage in what I call the MVP conversation, trying to find out what type of meaning and value and purpose did their life has or does their life has. Relationship issues. A lot of cancer patients begin to reevaluate their relationships, things that they maybe need to say or should have said or want someone to say to them. So those are some of the kind of common dynamics that when you start ministering to cancer patients, they're working through that in their heart and in their consciousness, and they're trying to make some sense of all of that.
Okay, now I gotta ask you because you were helping people for decades at Cancer Treatment Centers of America go through their cancer, and then you found out that you had cancer.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. And I have a very unique story. And as I said, our journey is different. My story, quite frankly, as I unpacked it, is that I was diagnosed with early stage 1 colon cancer. So we found it early. There were some symptoms. I listened to my body, and I hope someone is listening there and taking good notes. Pay attention to your body. Don't ignore certain things. And when you begin to sense something is not right, then you go find a healthcare professional and have a conversation. Did that, had a colonoscopy and an endoscopy, and lo and behold, there was a 4.4 size centimeter, tumor located on the right side of my colon. We quickly had surgery and removed 1/3 of my colon. I often tell people just refer to me as Reverend Semicolon to kind of lighten the mood when we're talking about cancer, because it has such a weighty feeling to it when people hear that. And the way that I was able to reconcile, Randy, for me, and this is my story, my journey, uh, is that this was part of, if you will, the assignment and purpose for my calling. That for 23 years almost, I had been speaking, doing interviews like this, radio, TV. I've done hundreds of seminars and speaking engagements, literally. And I had always been asked, how did you get into cancer care ministry in your family, or have you ever been impacted by cancer? And I would always say no, and everyone would be very puzzled with, well, how did you enter into this space? And what I believe is true for me is that I now have the ability to authentically and genuinely speak to this subject, not from a secondhand perspective, but now from a firsthand perspective. I've talked the walk of cancer, but now I get to walk the talk and really authentically tell people, I know how you feel. I know what you're going through. And that has done nothing more than enhance the ministry that God has given me. And I count it a privilege to be in the club of cancer with hundreds and thousands and millions of other people.
Well, how are you doing now? How's your outlook?
Oh, I'm doing well. Yes. So as a follow-up, the good news is that I did not have to receive radiation or chemotherapy. I actually head back and do my 3-month reevaluation next month, and I do a new colonoscopy and endoscopy. That's now part of the annual protocol as a colon cancer patient. You do that on a yearly basis, so we can just kind of keep an eye on things. And I feel great. I'm doing well, and the Lord has been gracious and kind to me, and so I'm grateful and I'm thankful. So thank you for asking.
You know, I you, you had to have had that moment when you found out that you had cancer, of kind of like, really, God, I'm the guy that helps people that have cancer. Why did you struggle with it, or were you so familiar with cancer and the journeys that you just went in with a fighting spirit and were like, I'm going to kick this thing and move on with my life? Just curious.
It was absolutely the latter, Randy.
Uh,
At the end of the day, I had been literally in a dress rehearsal for 23 years. I have seen and heard virtually every version, story, and dynamic of cancer. I have eulogized cancer patients. I have been to their churches. I've been to people's homes. I mean, I've literally, I'm not going to say I've seen it all, but I've seen as much as one can absorb in 20 years. When that word was given to me, I will say this, that I needed to have, and I think this is true for all cancer patients. I had to have a moment to digest that and take ownership of that and say, okay, he's talking to me. This is not me supporting someone. This is now directly related to me. And I needed that moment. It was very short. It was very brief. But to your point, I was able to kick into everything that I've ever heard, everything that I've ever taught, and everything that I've ever understood about cancer. And I thank every cancer patient and every caregiver that I've ever been privileged to support. And it is a privilege to support cancer patients. And I thank them for their firsthand uh, telling of their stories to me that really prepared me for when it was my turn. And when that was the case, I was able to put the key in the ignition and turn it on and say, listen, we're heading down the road here. We know medically what is sitting in front of us. And obviously, from a faith-based perspective, I get to now exercise the theology that I've taught and that I have ministered to and say, now it is my turn. And Lord, I will not have a guile word in my mouth, and I will serve you and I will love you. And so I never had why. I never had a moment of anger or despair. I simply digested it as it's now my turn. Just like so many other people, like 16.9 million people currently with a history of cancer. It's now my turn.
Hmm. I'm great to hear you had that attitude. My sister had a very fighting attitude. In fact, she would sign emails and things with the phrase "I win."
Mm.
So I know that attitude actually is hugely important in fighting cancer. Uh, what do you what do you find? What do you find? Are there any common traits in people that at least fight? Because here's the hard part for me. I'd love to sit here and say, if you just have the right attitude, you can kick cancer. Just, I, I know that that's not entirely true, but I do know that attitude plays a huge role. But I'm guessing you know better than me. So talk to me about how cancer patients approach it mentally affects them physically and spiritually.
Well, yeah, cancer is not just a physical disease. It impacts us mentally and emotionally and spiritually, actually. And so when we understand the composite nature of how God created us, he gave us a mind, he gave us emotions, and we are a spirit that lives inside of a physical body. So when we put all of those elements together, or if we break them apart, and begin to understand the unique components and how they interplay and interact one with another. Obviously, so let's kick into some biblical concepts here. The Bible says, as a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. Let this mind be in you that was in Christ Jesus. Be ye not conformed to the ways of this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind. The caveat, as you stated, and so we want to be very balanced in the message here, is that one cannot necessarily change the course of direction of their cancer just with their attitude alone. But if you pull that component out of the mix of good clinical care, being spiritually supported, you will have a very difficult journey to help people work through if there's not some aspect of their attitude that is being engaged and empowered with some other principles other than just cancer. And so attitude is vitally important. There is data and research that has been done to suggest exactly that by and large, cancer patients whose attitude has been adjusted around being hopeful, considering and believing that it is possible to survive a battle, et cetera, they cope better. In some cases, they tend to live longer. They respond more favorably in some cases to their treatment and care. But again, just having a positive attitude alone is not necessarily the end all or be all, but it is crucial because at the end of the day, the mind is sending signals and directives to the body in ways that, like the air traffic tower at the airport that's trying to give some instructions to a plane that's trying to land or take off, it is feeding information into our psyche and our consciousness that then can and potentially enable one, if nothing else, to work through the rigors and the highs and lows and the difficulties in some cases of treatment, allow them to be hopeful and encouraged to work through the battle. And so it's my outlet.
That's good. We're talking to Reverend Percy McCray. He is the director of faith-based programs, the Cancer Treatment Centers of America. He also has a podcast. I want to show it to you before we got here. This is the Health, Hope, and Inspiration podcast. So if what you're hearing is helping you, there's even more at the website. And if you need to refer somebody to this website, please do. It's healthhopeandinspiration.com. I'm going to throw that in the chat stream right now for those of you that can see the chat. And, it's interesting. If you swim in the toilet that is Twitter, sorry, Twitter, I know we're on you right now, but you find this thing, this misconception, it's a lie, from people that obviously don't know anything about Christianity or oftentimes God. But they think that anyone who is faith-based, anyone, a Christian who is really committed, especially those who would be charismatic, Rhema grads, okay? I went to Oral Roberts University, so man, I'm right there, but that's why I knew that's where I was able to guess where you went. They think that, well, we don't believe in science. We don't believe in medicine. And I know there are some fringe people out there that refuse to go to doctors and things like that. But that is not the vast majority of believers. Even the more charismatic, faith-based, believers, and not, we're all faith-based, I get that, but you know what I'm saying. Oral Roberts University, they taught us about what theologians call the trichotomy of man, body, mind, spirit. The Cancer Treatment Centers of America in Tulsa is in the building that Oral Roberts built. At least they were. I'm guessing they're still there. It's been a few years. For you, what have you learned about what I consider to be God's gift to humanity, which is understanding nature, understanding our bodies, and medicine? I view medical advance as the grace of God. What have you learned sort of from a theological perspective even about this as you've had to walk in the medical and the spiritual at the same time?
I appreciate your candor and your courage to even put on the table because it's vitally important. So number one, let's be very clear at the end of the day, you are exactly right. So from let's set the record straight here, at least from where I sit and based upon the organization that I represent, that medicine and science and spirituality and faith can have a relationship one with another, and they should have a relationship. You've mentioned my podcast, Health, Hope, and Inspiration. We interview many oncologists and doctors who also have a very strong faith-based orientation, who are Christians. And we talk about this subject very candidly with every physician that I interview. And I mean, I probably have interviewed 30, 40 doctors on my show. And I ask them, is there a conflict from where you sit, from your training perspective, from your own personal kind of engagement with the world of science and medicine and your spirituality and faith? And without fail, they all say there is no conflict. I'm a scientist. I'm a biology and chemistry. And so here is a biblical reference point that'll help us that for me was a huge learning curve. And it was the greatest blessing that I ever received in working in this environment. And it is the scripture that says that every good and perfect gift from above, from the Father of lights. Say it again. Every good and perfect gift comes from above. Medicine and science is a good gift. It is striving toward perfection. It has not perfected medicine and science. But even as we speak today, in my 25-year tenure, I have seen advancements. What can be done with cancer that when I first got into this arena was not even considered a conversation to be part of. Advanced genomic testing, as an example, precision medicine. There are things that are being done today that we never even had the slightest idea that could happen. As a matter of fact, is helping with now in the last 20 years, cancer patients are living longer now than they ever have in the history of recording data about cancer because of the great advancement of medicine and science. Are we there yet? No. But we are able to do things and facilitate processes in fighting back against this disease because of the advancement of medicine and science. So there is no conflict. As a matter of fact, last scriptural reference, it's interesting that on the original management team of Jesus Inc., 12 disciples, uh, had a medical doctor that was a and I find it amazing. Why does Jesus need to have a medical doctor part of the 12 disciples? It's a trick question. I'll let people try to come to terms with that. But at the end of the day, the point that I simply make here to answer this is, and you're right, in some fringe, charismatic, word of faith, there has been times that individuals have completely abandoned the idea of medicine and science, and that I'll just simply use my faith or I'll simply exercise kind of natural processes. And I would say, again, everyone should be led by the conscience of their and the Spirit of God. But the data strongly tells us and suggests to us that at the end of the day, when we amalgamate the concept of mentally supporting people, emotionally supporting people, spiritually supporting people in a medical and clinical environment, we now surround them with a whole person approach. We call it integrative care that is addressing all of the moving elements of who we are as human beings and not ignoring one for the other. And so that being said, there is a place for all. And at the end of the day, patients will value and be blessed by the fact that they can utilize their faith and their spirituality in a medical environment that is accepted, embraced, and supported, which is part of how I've been able to make a career at this point, because I have been allowed and my team at all of our facilities to engage patients when appropriate, when desired, that if spirituality is important to them, along with their clinical care team, to engage and support them accordingly with what is being done from a medical perspective. And I've seen some amazing things happen with patients as a result of that partnership.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, and I love the fact that you do come from a background that emphasizes faith heavily, and you're working in the medical field right there with the doctors, because I think that is exactly. I think the attempts to divide the body, the mind, and the spirit are, not from heaven, not from the Word of God, not from heaven. And,
And it's certainly beneficial at the end of the day. It gets us in a ditch,
yeah.
and we need, and it's all about balance. It's all about having balance. You're exactly right. The facility in Tulsa started out in the Oral Roberts City of Faith Hospital building. I worked in that building. I walked those halls.
I did too.
And always assumed that Oral Roberts had a vision of medicine and science and spirituality and faith working together, but not being exclusive. We're not in a custody battle. This is not a divorce that we're fighting over the kids, because the children want both mom and dad. They don't want to make one and the other. And if we negate one for the other, we know that we are not doing justice or service to the person that's in the center of that debate. And that is the patient who wants the best of both of those worlds operational on their behalf.
That's crazy. Back around 2000, you were working in the tower on the right. I was working in the tall one in the middle, not in medicine. We're in the same sort of building, just we didn't know it.
Right.
Last question, and I really do appreciate what you're saying. I think it's so right. And you speak not only from a wealth of biblical knowledge, but of on the ground actually doing this. So here's my last question, and this is the one that certain people watching this have been begging me to ask so far, I'm sure. What do you say to the person who's just got that diagnosis? I have friends in that boat. I'm watching them on Facebook and what they're going through. What do they need to hear?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think every cancer patient initially, when they're told that they have cancer, first and foremost needs to hear that God has not stamped an expiration date on the bottom of your foot. You are not a product in the grocery store. That medicine and science has its place, and it should be honored and respected. And any good and respected clinician should provide you with his or her very best medical idea and precept of what the data suggests to them, so that you can be well informed. But at the end of the day, God has the last and final word, or when you are leaving the planet, when it is time for you to leave the planet, and therefore that you should encourage people to enter into the space of the cancer conversation and continuum with the fact that we're going to take this one day at a time. We are going to trust and believe that God is ordering our footsteps. We're going to pray for our medical team and staff and our doctor. And then we're going to exercise the belief that this is the day that the Lord has made, and I'm going to rejoice and be glad in it. I think the mistake that many cancer patients make is they try to think about the big picture. As my mom used to tell me, it's only one way to eat an elephant, and that's a piece at a time. And if you try to eat him whole, he will choke you to death. Cancer is a big conversation and a big dynamic that you can't swallow whole. So we need to take it in bite-sized pieces, one day at a time, one step at a time, and one treatment at a time, and allow our minds, our emotions, and our spirits to be empowered around the thought and the concept that God is with us, He is around us, and He is in us, working things for our good. And so the scripture says, take no thought for tomorrow, because tomorrow has enough trouble of its own. We're going to focus on today, and we're just going to, devour this elephant one piece at a time. I use an expression at the end of each one of my podcast shows where I tell people, remember, we've got work to do. So keep chopping the wood. It's one piece of wood at a time. It's one scenario at a time. It's one treatment at a time. And at the end of the day, we allow people then to give them the benefit of not being absorbed and avalanched by the weight of cancer, trying to carry that whole thought at one time. We're dealing with this one piece at a time, one step at a time, one journey at a time. And people are able to manage that under those circumstances because it's much more doable. You can compartmentalize that way, and then surround those individuals with good support, those that can walk that path with them. And that's one of the reasons why we started a program also called Our Journey of Hope. I'm actually training pastors on how to start cancer care ministries inside of their local churches to do exactly what we've just talked about, and not allow the weight of cancer to just avalanche and crush you. We have to take that and we have to break that up into bite-sized pieces and digestible steps that we can manage from one day to the next. And when we do that, I have found that cancer patients are able to manage the whole dynamic of cancer much more successfully because of that school of thought. One day at a time, one step at a time, one piece at a time, one treatment.
Reverend Percy McCray, I appreciate your time. And I'm sure someone else needs to talk to you now. You getting the call. But I appreciate you answering God's call and laying down your personal ambitions and stepping into the role that He placed you in. And I can see how you're helping a lot of people. So thank you for that. If you are battling cancer, or if you know someone who is, be sure to check out the Health, Hope, and Inspiration podcast, healthhopeandinspiration.com. And you can hear more from Reverend McCray. And thank you. If you know somebody, again, who's going through this, I got some people in mind right now. On my end, please do share this. I really I really do think it can offer them some hope and some peace and some guidance, some encouragement, because this is a difficult battle. I understand, not having fought it myself, but having lost some loved ones, not just my sister to cancer. But I also know many people who have won the battle, like Reverend McCray has. So keep fighting, one day at a time. Listen to this man; he knows what he's talking about. And join us again next time here on Life Today Live. Thanks for watching. We'll see you again tomorrow.
If we have life, it is according to the mercy of God. If we have providence to guide us, it is God's mercy. The same for you, the same for every man.